Maruti go on and on saying, oh, the diesel market is declining. When they exited, 30% of their sales were all diesel.
Hyundai and Kia, they're really well placed in the engine purely by the choice because they seem to have petrol, diesel, CNG.
The calibration strategy for Maruti or even Tata Motors is always on that fuel efficiency. Whereas Mahindra's, it's all about power and performance.
We have to give a shout out to Tata on CNG though.
I think India as a market, we're going to be last man standing in ICE. Hello and welcome to Deep Drive, our weekly podcast powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Now, every week we get under the skin of the auto industry. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And this week we will be discussing internal combustion engines, or ICE as they're popularly known. Now, Hormazd, we discussed electric vehicles last week. This time it's ICE. And there's a reason for that. I think because like we were discussing, it's because even if you go by, let's say, optimistic targets, 30% EV market share by 2030.
I think that's optimistic.
Optimistic, exactly. It still means 70% would be internal combustion engines in some form or the other, hybrids or otherwise. So it's an important powertrain, and that's what we're here to discuss. Hormazd, the first thing I want to get into, before we get into, let's say, the brand-wise, what is making it so challenging for manufacturers looking at internal combustion? Of course, it's a dwindling, let's say, powertrain choice. EVs will play a prominent role. I think last week you also said that they are definitely the future. But there's also the tightening emission norms and a few other things that's making ICE tricky, right?
I think really, it's really been a perfect storm for ICE, so to say. It's been, hit from every side. You've got emission norms, which are really tightening. You've got the fact that, there's this push towards EVs, so investing in ICE is not making sense as a long-term investment. Don't forget, engines typically have life cycles of 10, 15, even 20 years. So, you have to think that if I invest now, will my investment pay off after that long? So people are really concerned. They are worried, though some brands do still believe in ICE. I think India as a market, we're going to be last man standing in ICE. And I think if you really look at, what has happened, I think the emission regulations have been singularly what has defined, the way engines have kind of transformed over the years. So I think with BS6, which came in 2020, we saw a whole bunch of diesels go out. Some great diesels went out. So really, I think that really marked a really sharp decline of diesels because, again, they're very expensive to kind of clean up. You saw the advent of turbo petrols, again, as a way of getting emissions, performance and efficiency. I think at the same time, I think overall fuel consumption has gone up or efficiency has come down because if you look at it today, petrol engines, a lot of them in single digits. Also with the blends of ethanol now going to E20, I think again, that's about a 5% reduction in efficiency. And as you go more and more, towards biofuels like ethanol, which is again going to be the future, you're going to have efficiency challenges because of the lower energy density of ethanol, which is not as good as petrol. So it's really not as efficient. So really a lot of challenges for ICE because, unlike EVs, which really you have no emission regulation to worry about, ICE, you've got CAFE, you've got now the specter of Euro 7 or BS7 also coming again, which is tightened. We had BS 6.2 come in, last year, April 2023, which was quite seamless actually, unlike BS 6, where, the Supreme Court did this unbelievably unjustifiable, or you couldn't even unfathomable reason of making the end date, for end of sale instead of production, which caused a lot of, let's say, havoc in the system. It didn't really help to clean the air. So they've had a lot of challenges. ICE has had a lot of challenges, but I think, there are companies or brands which have let's say, handle these challenges better. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about. Who's winning the engine race?
Exactly. So Hormazd, let's begin with, I'd like to start with Maruti, just simply because they are, the market leaders. And frankly, they're doing really well in the engine race, right? And you could maybe perhaps lump in their partners now, the new partners, Toyota too. So if we look at them, yes, in fact, there's a little bit of a clue here. This is a Maruti blog that Hormazd has a lot to share on. but they might have sort of had a dilemma with diesels, but they're kind of doing well with petrol. So what's your thought on their engine strategy?
I think with Maruti, I would put it in, let's say there are two sides to it. One is the regulatory side, and one is the emission side, and one is the efficiency side. That's where Maruti has really scored. Their engines are the most fuel efficient. They are a company that comfortably meets CAFE without having an EV, which says a lot. They have focused a lot on CNG. They are looking at hybrids. They are going to even stronger in hybrids. We did a whole podcast on their series hybrids. So really, they've kind of one company along with Toyota, which has bet on multiple, let's say, powertrains, except for diesel, which we'll come back to. And we'll come back to why they exited diesel very briefly. So I think, in that sense, they've done really well from, let's say, an efficiency standpoint and a CAFE standpoint.
So they are well poised, you're saying, to take on the next, let's say,
yes,
couple of years.
But the problem is that I think Maruti engines, they're not as much fun as they were earlier. I mean, if you look at, let's say, they've all been really strangled by emissions. And I think the problem for Maruti is that, as a brand, people expect a lot of fuel efficiency. So they compromise sometimes drivability performance for that bit of fuel efficiency. I mean, just I was driving the Swift with the new Z12 engine. I must say, much better low-end torque. Again, it's a long-stroke engine, the 92 stroke. Long-stroke engines are better for low-end torque because there's more leverage on the crankshaft. Yeah. And earlier, the K12 was more of a squarish engine. So the bottom end was inherently weak. So I think that way drivability is better. But again, the way they calibrate the engines with this very sharp tip in, tip out, which is they cut the fuel very abruptly to save fuel and have better efficiency. So you've got this little jerkiness at low speeds, which is quite annoying. And with that AMT, which they have refined, it kind of amplifies that kind of that ultra low speed drivability where there's that little bit of jerkiness, and it's a lot to do with their calibration strategy, which is absolutely on the edge to try and eke out the ultimate in terms of fuel efficiency. They want to do that for CAFE, and frankly, even their customers demand it of them. So, I mean, if you see that their engines, they just have one turbo. Booster jet, again, not a very impressive turbo as turbos go. It's great, but
it's good, but yeah.
And if you see the sales of the Francs, 80% are
the non-turbo.
The non-turbo, the 1.2. So it goes to show where their customers are veering towards. I mean, that's actually a problem for Maruti, I feel, because you can't give the kind of, let's say, punch which you'd want to. But
I think we discussed that also with the Jimny. I mean, it was very clear, even in a fun vehicle like that, they were still chasing a very efficient engine.
Absolutely. And that's why even, the 1.5 isn't really a great engine that way. I mean, they're very reliable, super reliable, very efficient. But in terms of, smile on your face, not too many of them do. The earlier engines did. The G13 in the Swift, if you remember that, the original Swift, 1.3 all aluminum. That was fantastic. The Zen's G10, which was the first gen, really free revving. But zero bottom end because it had massively over square engine. The bore much more than the stroke. And so I think, basically I think their engines focus a lot on fuel efficiency, focus a lot on reliability, which of course is a great thing. Simple engines, naturally aspirated is the way to go. But I think what's, very interesting is that they have invested in an all-new powertrain. The Z12 is a brand new engine. This is going to be the future. 4-cylinder gone to 3-cylinder. There's a reason for that because it can support a hybrid powertrain, which they're going to do in the future. Again, focusing on efficiency. As we've seen, the power has come down a bit. So again, not a very exciting engine, but a lot more drivable, which is what it is. So I think they have got their strategy right. But just coming to diesel, which I want to touch upon, I mean, that exiting diesel, we have to say over here, and I think we'd do a separate podcast on this because it's important for people to know it's not because there was no market for it. It's because there was a technical flaw with the cylinder head of their E15 diesel, which was the 4-cylinder diesel. if you remember, they launched it, they pulled it out just after a year. No one launches an engine just for a year. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, when you invest almost 1,000 crores in putting in your own engine. So there was technical flaw in this. It was the head which had an integrated exhaust manifold, which normally you don't do in diesels because it overcools the exhaust, which in turn doesn't, let's say, light up the DPF, which came in BS6. So while it was fine for BS4, there was an oops moment realizing it's not going to work for BS6, and that's why they couldn't take it forward because of this flaw, which we'll get into. I think it's worthy of a separate podcast. So really, I think they lost market share as a result of abruptly getting out of diesel. And though Maruti go on and on saying, the diesel market is declining, when they exited, 30% of their sales were all diesel. So it just didn't make sense for them to, let's say, exit out of it. And we've seen others taking benefit of this. The Koreans, Mahindra, Tata, I mean, they've still got a large percentage of diesel sales. So I think in that sense, they've made a big boo-boo with diesel getting out of that. But I think otherwise, I mean, for their focus, for what they want to achieve, which is high on fuel efficiency, very good CAFE, I think that's what their strategy is. Though it comes at the price of a bit of fun to drive. You don't get the turbos with a strong mid-range punch.
But do you think what was the diesel? I mean, I think, yes, it was obviously a really big blunder for them. All through their history, I think they've really struggled with diesels. They've had to go to partners, sometimes chose the wrong guys, like the Peugeot TUD5 engine when they had, then of course with the Fiat engine, the 1.3, I think that was a brilliant engine. But I think now, looking at the fact that they don't have a diesel, they are looking at hybrid. And I think that's something for them, like is a brilliant plan.
Yeah, that is. I mean, hybrid is a new diesel for them. Clearly, it has its advantage. We've seen it in the Grand Vitara. Of course, you still have the advantages of diesel, which on the highway, it's still a superior powertrain, gives you good efficiency. Hybrid, much better in city conditions. And the delta in price is much higher in a hybrid still. So I think that's why they've been very clever. They've got away with, not having a diesel.
Right, to Toyota also.
Absolutely. That is the whole partnership with Toyota. And I think we should talk about Toyota as well as part of this. I mean, from Toyota's point of view, they are also very clear. I mean, I think they haven't really invested too much in engine technology. They've got out of the small capacity petrol and the diesels. If you see what they did with the Etios, over there, 1.2s, 1.4s, the diesel all gone. That really didn't work. It just got completely wiped out with BS6. In fact, the cars also stopped making them because they didn't have engines for them. So many cars were axed because of that and because the engines couldn't be upgraded. But I think, they're still focusing on diesel. If you look at it, the Crista is still very much a diesel. Good demand for that. They're continuing making that. And the Fortuner, I mean, 500 Newton meters of torque. So, that's how it is. But I think, again, they are not looking at the small capacity diesels. That's why they're relying on Maruti and doing badge engineered cars for them.
Which I think makes sense for them. I mean, if you look at Toyota, in fact, they've put out this study, where they're trying to obviously shift the sort of focus onto hybrids, saying it's better for the environment to produce more hybrids. Now, we know those calculations, you can sort of present data in different ways. But I think they're very, very smartly looking at hybrids with Suzuki. They've got the strong hybrid technology. They pretty much pioneered it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think as far as hybrids goes, definitely they've taken the lead.
Let's move on to the next brand, Mahindra. I think they're really, really well placed as well.
I think Mahindra have done a cracking job. I think it goes back to investment of about maybe 8-9 years back, where they invested in, I think, over 4,000 crores in an all-new engine family, state-of-the-art, and we've seen the result of that. I mean, and honestly, they've got some of the best guys in the business. I think Velusamy, really, who's now the overall head of the entire Mahindra, for their technology. I think he and his team have done an incredible job on the engines. In fact, I think today the diesels, the 2.2 diesels, are really state-of-the-art, absolutely world-class. And in terms of refinement, far better than a lot of the international, brands. And let's look at what they have. They've got everything sorted. They've got a 1.2, now turbo petrol. They've got a GDI, which they've done for the 3XO. Clearly, again, engine a strong point over there. They've got a 1.5 diesel, which they've kept the diesel option. And they've got the 2-liter petrol and the 2.2. So they've really covered it. And in terms of transmissions, they've got Aisin, which is a great gearbox. And they've got
the automatic gearbox.
The automatic gearbox. And, so I think that way it's covered. And they've even got a 1.5 petrol waiting in the wings. So I think they've got it covered. No CNG, no hybrid right yet. Really, their big challenge or their big weaknesses, if you just take the engines from an efficiency standpoint, not very efficient. So that does have a penalty on CAFE.
But it plays to their brand.
It does. So it does play to their brand. But I'm just saying when you have to meet CAFE, that's a problem. But they've offset that with the XUV 400, which I believe now they've sold a certain number to offset that.
About 8,000 or so.
Yeah, so EVs really kind of offset the fuel efficiency penalty because the corporate average fuel efficiency. But coming to that, I think it was very interesting because some years back I met a Bosch calibration engineer and he said, the calibration strategy for Maruti or even Tata Motors is always on that fuel efficiency. So, you have to compromise a bit of drivability. He said, whereas Mahindra's, it's all about power and performance. They don't mind sacrificing fuel efficiency. And if you look at the customer, I mean, people who bought a petrol Thar, they're willing to, tolerate 5-6 kilometers per liter. You want that power. So it's just what the expectation level is. So I think Mahindra, in a way, is in an envious position that people buy their cars not for fuel efficiency, but for the performance, and they don't mind sacrificing fuel efficiency for that. But I think overall, really, one of the companies that's really got its engine strategy sorted as an SUV maker. Superb engines. I think the 2.2 diesel also is just one of the best that there is. Super refined, very powerful. And, for a company that was known for diesels, now even the new generation petrols are really absolutely very good. Yeah.
In fact, that brings me to another manufacturer, which is Tata Motors. Because again, known for their diesels, but not so great with petrols. And frankly, on the whole, I think they're on the back foot maybe in the ICE race.
You say that, but I think their 1.2 petrol, if you look at the numbers, has done fantastically.
Yes.
It has. So I think, but when we drive it, I don't think it's the cutting edge petrol. Right. They aren't the best as far as ICE goes. I think, again, they've focused so much on EVs where they are by far the market leaders. They haven't really focused on the ICE side so much. And today a company's got limited resources. I mean, just the other side with Mahindra. They were totally into ICE and got into the EV race very, very late. Not a great start with the XUV 400 where the Nexon just went ahead of them. With Tata, it's quite the reverse. So it's quite an interesting comparison. But I think Tata's, will have a problem going ahead, especially with the bigger vehicles, because right now they're dependent only on the Fiat diesel. And that dealing with Fiat is a nightmare. Any calibration change to do anything small, 10 million euros. So, it's super expensive to kind of, I think all the emission changes cost Tata Motors a lot of money because that's what Fiat charges. This engine also is pretty old. Fiat is not investing much into it. From what I understand, Fiat were desperate to have more power coming out of it for the facelift. But I think Fiat just said no, and they, from what I hear, they said there's a 2.2. If you won't take that, which didn't make any sense. So really, they were stuck with the same power output. So I think, being reliant on Fiat is a problem, and they don't yet have a petrol, which again is a problem. They're working on a 1.5 with 2 power outputs. So obviously that 1.5 will span a whole range of cars, maybe cars like the Curve and Sierra and all, which are above 4 meters. And a higher power output for the Safari, but that seems to be quite delayed. We have no idea when that's going to come out. So that really is a worry. And also the long term, let's say how long will the Fiat go on? Because from what I hear, some of the component makers may stop making parts for that. So they will have to have some alternative. I think in the lower capacity, they've got the 1.5 diesel. Now that's a very interesting engine because that's the only one. It's quite ingenious. What they've done is, they've managed to move that to BS6 and 6.2 without the SCR, which is the select air, without AdBlue, without the, so you don't have a urea tank. They are just going with the lean NOx strap. Now that kind of is not as efficient, takes the emission right to the edge on the margin, but obviously it's meeting that. The way it works is that all the NOx is collected, it's trapped, and then rich mixture is injected, and that's converted into nitrogen. But so rich mixture means there might be a small fuel efficiency penalty, but I think it's a very simple solution, and not many people know that's the only diesel right now without having the SCR or AdBlue tank. And SCR and AdBlue tank have their own issues as well. So I think smart move on that. I think the petrols again not really the best in terms of what they are. And when you look at 1.2 petrols, you've got a whole range out there. And I think you've got or let's say small capacity turbo petrols, and you've got engines which are much better in that regard.
So they are like you said, they are going to face tough times with the I think the ICE. I think another brand or two brands who I think are not going to face a challenge, Hyundai and Kia. They're really well placed in the engine purely by the choice, because they seem to have petrol, diesel, CNG. Within petrol, they've got naturally aspirated turbocharged. So
absolutely,
I think
yes, you're right, Sergius. I think for spread of powertrain, Hyundai, Kia, there's no one to match them. As you rightly said, they've got everything. And what about the transmission option?
Exactly.
They've got everything. They've got AMT, they've got IMT, the manual, which is halfway house. I find it quite funny to you. They've got a torque converter. They've got a DCT.
Exactly.
And the manual, of course.
Exactly.
Unbelievable. I don't think any manufacturer has so many transmissions on offer. So when it comes to powertrain, I think they give the broadest spread. They're the most well covered. Again, their engines, I think, I think the one which I like, which really works well, is the 1.5 with the CVT in the Creta, the naturally aspirated one. So I think it's a very easy engine for city use. Their DCTs, I think, again, not the best, and even their let's say turbo petrols, not the class standard like let's say Volkswagen or even Stellantis, which we'll talk about. But
they do the job.
They do the job, and it's just that little bit which honestly the average customer is not going to really notice. So I think they've really got a spread, and they're very banking a lot on diesel still. Still a large proportion of their Creta and Seltos sales, and their diesel really is good. That U2 diesel, it's really world class. And in fact, I think one of the best diesels right now is the Sonnet 1.5 with the 6-speed torque converter. Right. I think it's just probably, if money is no object, the best compact vehicle to drive today, despite being a diesel, because powerful, smooth, and very, very refined, and better than any petrol as well. So I think really, in that sense, I think Hyundai have got a really wide spread of powertrains.
I think also, Hormazd, for me, the best part is, unlike some of the other brands, they're already widespread, and if they need to, they can very easily get into hybrids as well, because they have that technology. So globally, they can bring it to India. They do. I think they've said that they can do hybrids. So
they are doing hybrids. I think Kia is doing a hybrid with a 1.2 thing, but I think for them, they have to localize it, because
localization.
And I don't think they're doing the series hybrid, so we don't know how. But they definitely can. You're right.
Can do it.
I think so. They're the one group that has got everything.
True. And there's another brand like this, Hormazd, which will also have, I think, a lot of powertrains, MG. They're very soon going to have, as they've said, even plug-in hybrids. So they're going to have petrol, diesel, hybrid.
Yeah, I don't think they'll have diesel.
You think they'll get out of diesel?
Absolutely. They'll replace the diesel with the plug-in hybrid, for the simple reason they're also banking on the Fiat diesel.
That's true.
That engine, its days are numbered.
Right.
I think next emission change might be a challenge when it comes 27, 28. And Fiat are not investing in that engine, rightfully so, because it's an old engine. They're not going to do that. So they don't have a diesel. Yes, you're right. They have plug-in hybrids and all, but I think MG, just terrible fuel efficiency. Their ICE, actually, MG are not good when it comes to ICE. Yeah. They may have it.
They have the choice, but not necessarily.
I mean, plug-in hybrid, anything electrified, like most Chinese makers, they're,
correct.
Top of the game. But in ICE, I think a classic example of really that 1.5 smooth engine, but horribly inefficient. And I think that's been one of the biggest complaints of a lot of customers.
True. And while we're talking, I know this is maybe hitting below the belt, but while we're talking about efficiency, there's another brand or another two brands, VW and Skoda, who have also sort of had this weight on their shoulders. They've tried to fight back and quite well, with the TSI, the 1 litre TSI, the 1.5 litre TSI. What's your reading on their ICE strategy for India?
I think both these engines are actually fantastic engines.
Exactly.
They are absolutely state of the art. Because TSI engines are so sensitive to driving style, the fuel efficiency can plummet. I mean, you know how it is.
Yeah.
Your throttle input, you have to make it rich to avoid the knock. So automatically,
Exactly.
a TSI engine, it kind of just, the efficiency just plummets. I mean, there's a big delta between what you get in a test cycle vis-a-vis what you get on the road. And those engines kind of want you to, push them. But really, I think they're fantastic. They're really phenomenal engines. But they're just two engines. I mean, they don't have hybrid, they don't have diesel, they don't have naturally aspirated, they don't have the wide choice of what Hyundai and Kia have. And that really is the stark contrast over there. So they're really operating in a very smaller corner. But what they do is very good. And again, they, I don't know, like Renault, like Europe, and they stupidly got out of diesel when I think they should have stayed in, and they could have stayed in. Especially, with their SUVs. I mean, a Tigor and a Kushaq with a diesel would have been really competitive.
I think Dieselgate just scared the hell out of everyone.
Yeah, so they've got a global strategy not to get into it. So that applies to India, which, again, a classic case of, being not so, let's say, tailored or focused on Indian requirements and using, let's say, your global plan to fit into India. It doesn't always work. But yeah, their engines, what they have, I think really fantastic engines. And even their Aisin 6-speed box with the 1 liter and the 1.5, the DSG. DSG, again, like DSG is not great in traffic, but just now I was in the Kushaq coming back from Mahabaleshwar down the Ghat, and I tell you, it's the best manual because the way it was downshifting, the way it was upshifting in manual mode, just fantastic. So it really had a blast with Kushaq. No, it doesn't. Yeah,
it's a joy to drive. I mean, I've taken it from you now, and it's absolutely a joy to drive. Doesn't try and interfere in what you want to do.
Exactly.
So another global group, Stellantis, Jeep, Citroen. I mean, they're really small in India right now, but where do you think their powertrain strategy is? Because frankly, it's almost like an unknown with them. You don't really know what they're doing.
Well, Jeep was a complete disaster, actually. I mean, how can you stop the petrol engine? I don't know what decision there was. They pulled out the petrol after they went to 6.2. See, what happens is that with every regulation change, companies have to decide if your volume is small. Sometimes the cost of upgrading the engine doesn't justify the cost. So that's when, these engines become vulnerable. And that's what happened with Jeep to a certain extent. But really, they should have invested and stuck with the petrol because right now, just having an only diesel powertrain for Jeep, when actually the demand for diesel is going down, especially the worry in the NCR, is just plain daft. So I think they're coming back with petrol. Not absolutely clear what they can do. They have a 1.6 petrol, which is the same family as the 1.2 of the Citroen, just one cylinder on. So theoretically, it's easy to manufacture even on the same line, but there's really no decision on that because again, Compass, what's going to happen to it in the future, a facelift, new model, all that still being decided. So I think really from Jeep, they got their strategy quite wrong. And that Fiat engine really, which they use, I think is a little outdated. NVH is really high. Still strong and torquey, but not the best engine. You compare it to, let's say, a Mahindra 2.2, which just blows it away in everything, Sure. So, and even though the Hyundais are much smaller capacity, 1.5s, and but they're much smoother as well. So I think coming to Citroen, I would say their 1.2 is the best small capacity turbo petrol today. Absolutely fantastic. Good balance of bore and stroke, nice long stroke engine. Don't forget, turbo engines like longer strokes. It's just better for them. That's one of the reasons why Suzuki has traditionally had a problem turbocharging their engines.
Yeah.
So, though the Fronx is now the 1 liter slightly longer stroke engine, but that really is an issue. But I think the 1.2 Citroen is the best engine, and mated to that Aisin 6-speed box is really, really good as well. Yeah.
True. And, so I think, Jeep and Citroen, they're very clearly getting their game plan sort of sorted out right now. They are in that mode, obviously with products and engines. And there's another brand also for me, which I lump together in the same, and that's Honda. I mean, they also seem to be requiring to get their game plan sort of sorted for India. Therefore, also the engine plan.
Look, I think, you got it from Honda's point of view, they're making a lot of money, and that's what they are looking at. So theoretically, would say they should have come with a turbo. They've got that 1 liter turbo, but it's too costly.
Right.
So they're sticking with a 1.5, which actually is quite an engine if you look at it. I mean, it's a remarkable engine. I think probably really an amazing naturally aspirated engine today. And the flexibility of that is just unbelievable. I remember when we were testing the Mobilio, I don't want to say where, but in third gear, it pulled from 10 Ks to 150 Ks just like that. That's what you call flexibility and tractability. I mean, that is Honda for you. All the VTech, all the valve technology working to the max. It's famed. They talk about it. VTech, all that. So all that is there.
But that's, the thing for me almost. I mean, they're brilliant with engines and technology. Really brilliant.
And they got out of diesel also.
Yeah.
They came late to diesel and they got out of it very fast.
The strategy is
they've always, absolutely.
Yeah.
Strategy is wrong.
Great, but they just apply it in the wrong area.
And if you think of it, they're not doing a hybrid on the Elevate when everyone's talking about hybrids right now.
It shouldn't have been on the city, should have been on the Elevate.
Exactly. I mean, the city doesn't make sense for an after. So I think you're right. Engines, what they are good, but their strategy, they've completely muddled it up.
True. And what about Renault Nissan? I think that's the last group we have to discuss.
Yeah.
At least.
So we talked about let's say I think again with a lot of the Europeans, they've got out of diesel. The K9K gone, which was a super engine. They could easily have upgraded to BS6. They didn't do that, and that I think effectively killed the Duster, and the Terrano or whatever. It's really a stupid strategy. So I think they got that wrong. What do they have now? They just have a 1 liter naturally aspirated engine. They've got that old BR10, which is really a very basic engine for the Kwid. Really not very refined. Just in terms of refinement, it's not there. It's really a low-cost engine made for the Kwid.
The turbo is quite good.
The HR10 is good, completely different, and they've got the HR13. So they've got the HR10 and the HR13. And so again, not too much of a strategy. And what's unfortunate is that even with the new investment, the 600 million euros or dollars were coming in for these 4 new models, the engines will still be the HR10 and the HR13 with really no difference. So no hybrid, so that's it, just these 2 engines. But I think, it's, I think it really, in the end, goes to show that, you need a lot of commitment. I think, Sergius, we've talked a lot. I think we're going to be, I think before we get on to what, let's say, what's going ahead, I think one thing we've not talked about is Aisin. I'd like to talk about Aisin as the
gearbox manufacturer.
I think it's become the Fiat multi-jet of transmissions, where so many people are using them.
True.
You've got Citroen using it.
Right.
You've got Volkswagen using it. You've got Mahindra using it. You've got MG using it. Maruti using it. So just look at that, all of them. So really makes a case for localization, but I think still you need a lot of numbers. And the fact that
beyond what they have currently.
I think so. And that's why automatics are so expensive, because they're not localized.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point actually. There's not a single automatic transmission, I think, that is localized, right?
No.
It's a torque converter.
No. Not even a DSG. So you can't count an AMT because that piggybacks on an existing one, which Neti Marelli do and all. But
that's just a kit added to a...
That's right.
Yeah, fair enough. Great. So I think that rounds up all the brands, Hormazd, that we need to discuss. Before we end, maybe we can touch a little bit on the fuels, because there are 2 interesting fuels coming up in the future, in the sense that biofuels, of course, and maybe even synthetic fuels that, some of the...
I think synthetic fuels for us is going to be...
it's just a super
but biofuels are coming, and I think, the government has made a push towards that. Obviously, you want renewable, let's say, fuel as well, renewable resources, and clearly biofuels is that way, one way. But I think, again, challenges there, because one thing that it really impacts is fuel efficiency. Yeah. And if you go towards 80% ethanol, your efficiency impact can be as much as 25%. So really, what has to be thought out is how, you're going to compensate for that lack of... It's going to pinch the consumer again. As it is, I said, fuel efficiency, while, on the lifestyle test cycle, it might be good. Real world, it's actually quite bad. I think much worse than what it used to be, because even traffic has gone up. Driving conditions are difficult, which kind of, impact efficiency that way. I think biofuels is something that is going to be the next step. Again, a big challenge for OEMs, because, to have biofuel cars You'll have to make a lot of modifications to the engines. A lot of these fuels are corrosive as well, so new materials have to be used.
Exactly.
But I think that's going to be the big next step. And we haven't talked about CNG.
CNG, yeah.
Which a lot of, I think, companies like Maruti and Tata, again, banking on. Again, Maruti banked a lot on CNG. A lot of their sales come from CNG. But to me, it's a little bit of a lowest denominator kind of fuels.
Has that stigma.
I think it's for people who only want efficiency and nothing else. And I think people have little moved on from that. And again, coming back from Mahabaleshwar, I saw CNG with a big line as well. So it's not that convenient still to do. But it's a good option. And I think, for fleet operators, it's really, really convenient because
True.
It's all about the running cost. And I think that's where it still scores.
And we have to give a shout out to Tata on CNG though.
Absolutely. They've made CNG look appealing.
Exactly. They first of all introduced it in higher variants.
Absolutely.
And then dual cylinder technology is such a simple idea when you think about it.
That's
and not just half the thing.
No, I think hats off to Tata. And I think really what it shows with Tata Motors is they've found these little niches in the market, to kind of address. Despite being hamstrung, again, we're talking about engines, they've not had access to the best technology, which goes back to say they should have done something with JLR for the Safari and Harrier, which they didn't do. I mean, there was talk of that 2-liter engine being made into a 1.5 3-cylinder, which would have been a good fit there. But that engine was inherently so expensive, it wasn't making sense. So then they had to go to Fiat, which is a shame that when you have within your family a good set of engines, you can't use them because they're too expensive. But having said that, hats off to them. I think really the way they've kind of, made the most of what they had and done it in a very innovative and ingenious way, got to hand it to them. Yeah.
True. Absolutely. So I think that wraps up our ICE discussion, Hormazd.
Well, I think what I'd like to add is, petrol heads don't give up heart so easily. I think the ICE engine is still going to be around for a long time, maybe not quite in its most exciting forms that they used to be. A lot of engines we love have gone because of emissions, but ICE is still there.
Around.
And we are going to be around too, back again next week, same time, Saturday at 11 o'clock. Do tune in and hope you enjoyed watching us.